Far in the night, talking close.
Where you going,
Stay in my heart. You're the part that I know.
I guess if I'm going to tell about Aleea, I'd start at the beginning. Her dad and I had 2 children, Bethany, and we had a son, Troy, and we wanted to follow God's will for our life, and we were trying to decide if we should have a 3rd child or not, but we could never get on the same page. We finally concluded, we asked God to give us a sign, and while we were praying, and that never happened. So we finally concluded it didn't matter to God whether we had a child or not, that was given to us to decide that. So then we set about seriously deciding, and we decided we should not have a 3rd child. So we went through the medical paperwork for a vasectomy, and
she was conceived the night before I went in for my vasectomy. Her mom and I, we talked and we thought, well, we have 2 children, boy and a girl, and that seemed like a pretty good family to us. But God had a different plan for us.
And pretty soon I got a phone call telling me that we had a positive pregnancy test, and I could not believe that. It was pretty much shock, and that whole first day was shock. And by the 2nd day, we were overjoyed. As far as growing up, her brothers and sisters, they adored her.
So Aleea was my younger sister. We were 5 years apart. She was 5 years younger than I was. I have so many stories about her. She was goofy. She was really goofy, and we were always laughing. You know, like, I mean, all it could take was just like a glance or like a tone of voice or like a reference to something growing up, and we would just be like giggling, and we were always laughing. We were always laughing together. We were always having a lot of fun. Everything was an adventure with Aleea and I. We would make everything, turn everything into an adventure.
She stayed happy. As she grew up as a child, she just made us all laugh. And if one of us was sad or we were down, she would find a way to bring us back up. That's who Aleea was. She always focused in on the good parts of anybody. She never had a diminishing word against anyone that she met. She loved to sing. She bounced around the house. I say bounce, not just walk, just bounce around the house. She would be singing, or she would be humming a tune, and she'd have a big smile on her face. Her hair was this golden blonde. It was almost white, in fact. And you would see her head just above the furniture, bopping along, singing a song.
She also loved animals, and so it wasn't any surprise that she fell in love with horses. And that was good for a parent because she wasn't so interested in boys. She was mainly interested in horses. And one of the most noteworthy trail ride, she was maybe about 7. We had gone out, and her brother and sister were on horses in front of her. Then Aleea came next, and I was the last horse. And her horse stepped on an area of the trail that had ground bees, and so the bees stung the horse on the back legs, and so her horse bucked her out of the saddle, and she flew out of the saddle. And as a mother, I was horrified in the back seeing my baby flying out of the saddle. And she never turned loose of the reins. She went over the horse's head, landed on the ground on 2 feet, still holding the reins, looking at the horse eye to eye.
I could give you a book of different positive adjectives that describe Aleea, but I think one that resonates the most with me is courage. Aleea had a lot of it. And that's coming from a guy that has spent a lot of time skydiving and base jumping and a lot of time at war. And Aleea was so courageous.
Aleea and Bethany and Troy were all raised in the church, and they all knew about the love of Jesus. And that stayed with her for a lifetime.
She wore her faith on her wrist. There was no secret where her faith was. She carried it around like that. Anytime that she could see someone who was struggling, she would go up to them and say, you know, God's got a plan for you. She was determined to be the best servant that she could for God. I mean, I would go to the hospital and I'd be there and I'd sit down and she said, Dad, are you comfortable? Do you need anything? I can call down and get you something to eat. I can, get you some water. I'll call the nurse in. I says, I'm fine, Aleea. I'm here to see you.
Growing up in high school, when Aleea got to her dating years, she would always bring boyfriends over, and I would grab all my friends and kind of line the driveway and wait for these boyfriends to show up, just to let them know, hey, don't mess with my sister. I was always there. I was always the protective one, but Aleea could definitely handle her own.
We had a few boys that came around the house, and my son mainly fielded those off. But eventually she shared with me that she had met someone at church that she was interested in, and she would like me to meet him. You know,
I met Wesley, and he's a really nice guy, and we all loved him. We all thought he was great and good for her too. He was a good match for her. And I remember Aleea called me one day, and we were just like talking on the phone like we normally do, sisters. And she told me she thinks that she has found the person that she's going to marry.
So she brought Wesley over, and he seemed like a baby to me, just like she did, so young. And but I liked him. And so I had opportunities of him coming to see her at the house, and got an opportunity to get to meet him, and eventually fell in love with him.
Getting married was a big learning experience, that's for sure. It's funny, a lot of times you think with marriage that you kind of need to just go in with a clean slate in terms of not having expectations for each other, not having things that you expect the other person to do, or clear roles that you want the other person to fit into, and just starting from a clean slate. But it's funny that starting from a clean slate also means you start not knowing anything. So tons of things, questions we should have asked, things we should have learned ahead of time, talking to mentors and stuff like that every married couple has to hammer through in those first 6 months. But just two selfish people learning how to live together. We ended up working it out, obviously. And we just loved life together. It's funny, we've had multiple couples, and I mentioned to Aleea that this was just a blessing of how much she'd given to me, and we've had multiple couples over the last 6 months or so say that apparently we were an example of the couple that they wanted to be when they grew up. and when they got married. And whether it was just how we worked together or how we both blessed each other in our marriage, or how we were raising Asher, and Aleea was just an amazing mother to him. She completely broke down when she first found out that she had breast cancer, just holding Asher and not wanting to leave him without a mother. But after that, every single thing after that was just her comforting other people, which was just amazing. Her shortness of breath ended up getting acutely bad one day, where she just felt like the elephant on her chest was huge. So we ended up going into the hospital, and we ended up getting admitted and staying in the hospital for 2 weeks. And the whole time that she was there, you know, still getting bad news. We'd find, oh, you have extra fluid around your lungs that's keeping you from breathing. You have extra fluid around your heart. One part of your heart is not working properly. Oh, you have a tumor in your brain. It's funny. I feel like it took us about a week and a half to get some good news that she didn't have anything in her bones. And we were high-fiving each other when that happened, because we were like, finally, we have some good news. But she was just the most courteous, happy, full of light patient that you would ever see. And I remember we got discharged from the hospital, went home thinking we had a plan, thinking that we were going to be getting better. And, you know, people were really taking great care of us at home, making sure that we were comfortable. And on the 28th, on Wednesday, 28th of June, that was my birthday. And we were at home, and she threw a surprise birthday party for me in the midst of all her struggles. And so I get home one day with a friend, and there's 18 people sitting on the back porch waiting to hang out with me and surprising jumping out. And it was just such a cool thing for her to do for me. And we're cutting this cake. We're about halfway through the party when she just reaches over and says, you know, she'd mentioned that her breathing was getting more difficult that day, and it was getting more and more difficult to keep her oxygen at a good level. And she just reaches over and says, I think we need to do something. And so we packed up our things quick, grabbed the extra oxygen tanks that we had, hopped in the car, and went back to the hospital. And when we got there, she'd been on some oxygen support at home, but they had to crank it all the way up to get her to be able to breathe to the highest level that the hospital could even provide. And we knew something was different. And it didn't take very long for the doctors to do some tests, and late in the night, the ER doctor came back in and talked to us and said that of all the things that they thought was going on with her lungs and her breathing, they'd already treated, or there wasn't any evidence for the ones that were treatable, and that they might have gotten it wrong, and that it might just be the cancer taking over her lungs. And I remember saying that God's the only thing left. Even before the doctors came in and in a very gentle, loving way told us that there wasn't anything that they think they could do, we said God's the only thing left. And even at that point, she was still, it was getting more difficult for her to breathe. She was pretty tired, but even then she was still in good spirits. She was still joking with the doctors and the nurses, and just an amazing testament to her spirit. But I remember just hours before Aleea passed away, she said she had a couple things that she wanted to say. She wanted to say so much more, but it was difficult for her to talk, and because she had to kind of catch her breath often. And I remember she said, Asher's not allowed to forget me. I'm not allowed to get rid of London, our dog. That I have to trust in God, and that in due time I can get married again. And she just had this peace about her. But she didn't make it. And I remember thinking, that there were so many people loving us through this, and the church was really being the church, and the friends and family were amazing, and we just felt like the whole world was being that warm hug wrapped around us. But it's like feeling a warm hug on the outside while your heart is being violently ripped out of your chest from the inside. Where that warm hug is awesome, but it just doesn't feel like the medicine is making it down to the part that's actually broken. Nothing can touch that in the moment. As devastating of a thing as it is, I cannot think of a way that it could have gone better. That knowing now how far her cancer was, and the fact that by the time we found out she probably was not going to get better, at least with nothing that humans can do, that God would bless us by giving us the maximum amount of time. What seemed like finding out late at that time, that he really just gave us the maximum amount of time without worry, that we were allowed to live our lives until the end, that we were allowed to take an amazing trip to Europe, a once-in-a-lifetime just thing with just me and her, to celebrate each other. That we were able to, that she was able to just be herself, that she wasn't wasting away, that she still had her body, she still had her communication, her mind, her spirit, that she wasn't beaten down when this all happened, when she was in the hospital. Honestly, it was a beautiful letdown. It was a tender letdown that God gave her, and I think that was such an amazing blessing. That he knew that the only way to heal her was for him to step in and bring her home and give her a whole new body, and yet he just let her down with a graceful fall, where she was herself right up until the end. It's not really a question of if suffering or if trials are going to happen. It's a question of when. Spouses love each other, but every spouse is going to lose a spouse at some point, whether you're the one that goes or whether you're the one that stays. No mother wants to lose a child, and that usually doesn't happen, but almost every child loses a mother. It's going to happen, and it's going to happen to everybody, and the Bible talks clearly about that even. That we're all but dust in a cloud which is here today and gone tomorrow. But just know that whatever comes along, it is possible and it is right that God would actually be with you through it. That he would not completely take away the suffering in all cases, because then he doesn't get to spend eternity with us, and we don't get to spend eternity with him. But that he provides gentle letdowns even. And that he can be trusted, even when things are as dark as they can come.